tremendous gales swept the liner from her moorings to crash into the wrecked Paris before settling down on a mud bank. French experts report that there may still be good hope of salvaging the Europa, so perhaps there may yet be a new lease of life for the former pride of the German merchant fleet.
In the early days of World War II, Hitler and his advisors developed an elaborate plan for Germany's premier superliners, Bremen and Europa. Bremen narrowly avoided interception by the Royal Navy after a dangerous dash across the Atlantic. Now, she and the Europa were sent to Bloemenvas, where they were converted into troop ships. The liners would play a vital role in the Nazi invasion of Britain, but not by carrying troops across the Channel. Instead, 4 days before the planned invasion, they would join the liners Gneisenau and Potsdam, along with 4 escorts, and sail from southern Norway bound for the English coast between Aberdeen and Newcastle. The scheme was designed to divert British forces away from the actual planned place of invasion east of Portsmouth. But as the Battle of Britain wore on, the Luftwaffe failed to gain an advantage over the RAF. And by September 1940, it was clear that the Nazi forces were woefully underprepared for a land invasion of the British homeland. On September 17th, Hitler called off the planned invasion. Bremen and Europa remained in Bremerhaven, clad in a dazzle paint scheme. Their fates left uncertain as their country burned around them. Germany would never again build another liner that could touch their size, power, or beauty. One of my favorite aspects of a story like the Europa is the sheer ambition that it took to create the great ocean liners. It's a new year, so that has me thinking over my own ambitions and what I'd like to build. A big part of all those plans is putting myself out there more, whether it be doing stuff like this, putting myself on camera, or in other aspects of my life. But I find that my anxiety can be a major roadblock. That's why I'm really happy that I have a therapist that I'm able to work with to create strategies to overcome this anxiety and achieve my goals. I'm so excited to once again be working with this video sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp makes starting therapy easier and less intimidating. They let you meet with your therapist however you feel most comfortable, whether it be through phone calls, video chats, or even through messaging. You can check them out using the link in the description below. Finding a therapist can be hard, but BetterHelp has a network of over 30,000 licensed therapists that they can match to your specific needs, preferences, and location. To get started, you just fill out a questionnaire that will ask you about your challenges and what you're looking for in a therapist. You'll then be matched with a therapist in most cases within 48 hours. From there, you can easily arrange sessions that fit your schedule. And if for whatever reason you feel like your therapist isn't a match, you can switch to a new one at no additional cost. Join the over 4 million people who have used BetterHelp to start living a healthier and happier life. Go to the link in the description below or visit betterhelp.com/bigoldboats to get started today. Using that link not only helps out the channel, but it also gives you 10% off your first month, so you can give BetterHelp a try and see if it helps you. So if you're struggling, or if you just want someone to talk to help set up a plan to achieve your goals, give BetterHelp a try. Thank you again to BetterHelp for supporting the channel. And now, back to the Europa. Before World War I, German shipyards routinely built some of the largest, fastest, and most luxurious liners the world had ever seen. After the war, the country suffered mass unemployment, crippling inflation, and major political instability. The brutal fighting and mass carnage of the war was far greater than anyone could have anticipated, and the Allies blamed Germany. They used the Treaty of Versailles to exact revenge. To replace Allied shipping lost during the war, the treaty required all German vessels over 1,600 tons, half of all vessels between 1,000 and 1,600 tons, and a quarter of all ships smaller than 1,000 tons turned over to the Allied powers. Germany's merchant fleet was all but eliminated overnight. Bahlen's magnificent trio, Imperator, Vaterland, and Bismarck, the largest ocean liners in the world, were all handed over to Great Britain and the United States. This left the pre-war shipbuilding boom at a standstill, and Britain once again dominated the transatlantic passenger trade. Despite the economic devastation, Germany's industrial capabilities emerged from the war relatively unscathed. The shipyards in Bremen and Hamburg survived the war, and while treaties forbade investment in massive new warships, they were free to resume building passenger liners as soon as funding and materials could be secured. This happened faster than anyone could have imagined. Germany took great pride in their shipbuilding abilities, and re-entering the race to build ever larger and faster ships was a major national priority. One of the country's top shipping lines, Norddeutscher Lloyd, based in Bremen, entered the war with a fleet of over 900,000 tons. After the Treaty of Versailles, they were left with only a handful of tiny ships, totaling only around 57,000 tons. Nevertheless, the company almost immediately resumed operations in 1919, offering freight and tug services, as well as day-trip passenger voyages. The company soon reopened its Bremerhaven to New York route in 1920 by chartering former German vessels now owned by the United States. An agreement was reached in 1921 between Germany and the Allies that allowed Norddeutscher Lloyd to retain the uncompleted SS Columbus. Construction started on the 32,581-ton liner in Danzig in 1914, but work was paused during the war. Upon completion in June 1924, she was by far the largest, fastest, and most luxurious German passenger ship sailing under the German flag. The period from 1920 to 1926 saw the company embark on an aggressive mission to rebuild its former fleet. Relying mainly on American credit, the company began building numerous moderately sized freighters and passenger liners, as well as buying back several formerly owned vessels. By 1926, the company had performed an economic miracle, finishing the year with a profit. Eager to re-establish a premier German passenger service on the Atlantic, Norddeutscher Lloyd placed an order in the fall of 1926 for a pair of superliners that would set a new standard for luxury and speed on the North Atlantic. With their new liners, Norddeutscher Lloyd set out to challenge Britain's dominance on the North Atlantic. For 2 decades, Cunard's Mauretania comfortably held the record for the fastest crossing. But after a lull in post-war shipbuilding, by 1926 it was clear that the speed record was up for grabs, and the Blue Ribbon made for an appealing opportunity to demonstrate Germany's industrial might. But speed wasn't the only distinction ripe for competition. In the 1920s, the pre-war liners that dominated the shipping industry increasingly felt outdated as art, culture, and society raced forward. The Jazz Age saw sweeping changes to everything from women's suffrage to music and literature. Radio was gaining traction. Planes and airships were taking to the skies. The gilded decor of the pre-war liner felt out of sync with a society obsessed with progress, technology, and modernity. The French were the first to build a major liner reflecting these changing tastes. The SS Ile-de-France sailed her maiden voyage on June 22, 1927, while Bremen and Europa were taking shape on their slipways. The French liner did away with the pre-war styles and embraced a bold new Art Deco design scheme. The bold new approach abandoned the country manor designs that once dominated the industry and created a modern standard for luxury at sea. Germany's new superliners would follow suit. To achieve the intended service speed of 27.5 knots, Bremen and Europa's engineers, led by Paul Biedermann, embraced a bold new hull design optimized to reduce drag. Both ships were equipped with streamlined Orts rudders designed for nimble, high-speed maneuvering. But their most notable innovation could be found in the bow. Since the dawn of steel and steam, passenger liners typically utilized a knife's edge bow designed to cut through the water. But even before the turn of the century, tests conducted by the United States Navy showed that warships equipped with ram bows tended to perform more efficiently. David W. Taylor, a naval architect and the Navy's chief constructor, used this concept to develop what was known as a bulbous forefoot design. It was first implemented on the dreadnought battleship USS Delaware, which entered service in 1910. While the radical design showed considerable promise, most designers continued to prefer some variation of the traditional bow design. But Bremen and Europa's designers had to be bold if they wanted to achieve the blue ribbon, and testing showed that Taylor's bulbous bow could help unlock the speeds they set out to achieve. The two ships were constructed in tandem at separate shipyards. Europa was built by Blohm & Voss in Hamburg, and Bremen was built by A.G. Wesser in Bremen. Europa was launched first on August 15, 1928. She was christened by Inez Glossel, daughter of Norddeutscher Lloyd's managing director Ernst Glossel. Bremen's launch came just one day later, on August 16th. Europa wasn't the largest ship in the world when she was launched, but she was close, coming in at 49,756 gross registered tons, with a length of 936.7 feet or 283.5 meters and a beam of 101.7 feet or 31 meters. She was designed to carry up to 2,195 passengers across 4 classes, with a crew of 965. She was equipped with 4 airtight boiler rooms designed to create positive pressure to eke out every last bit of power from her 20 oil-fired water tube boilers. These powered 4 sets of geared steam turbines that drove 4 bronze propellers. She featured a streamlined design with sweeping curves, all meant to convey a sense of speed. Gone were the days of towering funnels. Europa and her sister featured just 2 low-profile funnels each that only barely peeked out over their superstructures, making them appear almost more like modern airships than passenger liners. Construction was set to wrap in spring 1929, and Norddeutscher Lloyd planned a triumphant double maiden voyage. But at 3 o'clock in the morning of March 26, 1929, a night watchman discovered a fire on board Europa. The blaze would dash any hope of a dual maiden voyage and threaten to destroy Europa before she ever sailed a single voyage. By March 1929, Europa's fitting out was nearly complete. While in just a few weeks her brand new crew would soon fill the liner. During her fitting out period, when workers went home for the evening, she sat virtually empty save for a tiny crew of night watchmen, who were mainly there just to prevent theft. Unlike a proper crew who would have been trained in how to deal with a fire on board, these night watchmen could do little but wait for outside fire crews to arrive once they discovered the fire. Meanwhile, the blaze, fanned by high winds, quickly spread throughout the new ship. Hamburg firefighters immediately began pouring water into the vessel, and she soon began listing heavily to starboard. The list was so severe that the ship had to be evacuated at 10 a.m. out of fear that she would fully turn over, but miraculously, she remained upright. She settled into the mud with only just a few feet of freeboard at her well deck. The damage was severe. Water and fire gutted most of her interiors, and her machinery was all but destroyed. The cause of the fire was never determined. Arson was suspected due to bitter disputes between workers and management, but no evidence was ever found to support the theory. On July 19, 1929, SS Bremen sailed her maiden voyage and easily captured the Blue Ribbon away from Britain's Mauretania. But it would take almost a full year to refloat and repair SS Europa. She finally sailed her maiden voyage on March 19, 1930, under the command of 61-year-old Commodore Nicholas Janssen. Despite a rough and stormy crossing, Europa was able to claim the Blue Ribbon away from her sister with a crossing that was just 18 minutes faster. Europa never quite overcame her late debut, and she tended to get overshadowed by Bremen, which captured the public's imagination and the industry's admiration when she began her career 1 year prior. But Europa quickly matched her sister's popularity with the traveling public, and quickly became one of the most successful liners of the interwar period. For a blissful moment, Germany's superliners achieved the dreams of their creators. Their triumph would be short-lived. SS Europa offered an onboard experience completely unrivaled by her pre-war competitors. Paul Biederman envisioned accommodations indistinguishable from the best hotels from any major city. First-class public spaces followed a similar axial plan pioneered by the Imperator in Vaterland, with sweeping rooms that flowed from one to the next along the full length of the ship's superstructure. Her promenade deck started with a smoking room that opened up to the grand social hall, followed by a library and writing room, and ending with a sumptuous ballroom. These were all connected by a 446-foot or 135-meter long thoroughfare. Spaces were fitted out with furnishings that could be easily rearranged to fit a variety of uses throughout the day, from afternoon tea to dances, concerts, and movie screenings at night. All of these rooms were situated high in the ship and lined with massive floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the ship with light. Long gone were the stuffy dark rooms of the past. Second and tourist class spaces were given near equal attention and featured similar sweeping layouts with high ceilings. This attention to detail made the sisters extremely popular with the burgeoning middle-class tourists, who wanted to sail on a budget but didn't much like being crammed into repurposed third-class spaces on older ships. Munich-based architect Paul Trost led Europa's interior design team. While his designs departed from the traditional Grand Hotel styles of the past, they stopped short of fully embracing something as bold as the popular Bauhaus style of the time. This approach yielded a warm and comfortable luxury that avoided the harsh austerity of future modern designs. Wood paneling, soft lighting, and rich textured upholstery and carpeting created inviting spaces that passengers adored. Almost all first-class cabins featured private bathrooms and attached closets, a feature travelers used to find hotels increasingly came to expect. Second and tourist class cabins were more austere, but they were comfortable and well exceeded most of the competition at the time. Perhaps overdoing their obsession with speed and modernity, both Bremen and Europa were equipped with a small seaplane and catapult situated between their funnels. The idea was to deliver mail even faster by launching a plane about 1 day before the ship's arrival. On October 7, 1931, Bremen's seaplane went missing. Its wreckage was discovered 2 days later. The crash killed both 27-year-old pilot Fritz Simon and mechanic Rudolf Volknecht. The accident devastated Captain Ziegenbein and his crew. Ultimately, the seaplane concept, which was also implemented on the Ile-de-France, proved impractical and was abandoned at the end of the 1935 season. The low-profile funnels also proved to be an issue. On early voyages, passengers complained that her upper decks were frequently enveloped in smoke. The decision was quickly made to add 15 feet to their height, and these changes largely alleviated the issue. Overall, Bremen and Europa proved a massive hit with travelers. The two ships carried 12% of all passenger traffic in the early 1930s, and managed to increase Norddeutscher Lloyd's North Atlantic market share by 17.6%. They were seen as modern marvels and set a new standard for the industry, but their success came at a difficult time both for Germany and the North Atlantic passenger trade. The Great Depression led to a serious drop in passenger numbers across the industry, and many legacy liners struggled to fill their berths. While Bremen and Europa had an advantage over most of the competition, Adolf Hitler's rise to power cast a foreboding shadow over the liners. When they began sailing under the Nazi flag on September 15, 1935, they increasingly became a target by protesters in New York, who were outraged by the violent anti-Semitism and authoritarianism of the German Reich. Several high-profile incidents saw demonstrators sneak on board and rip down the Nazi flag, a symbolic act that represented a growing discomfort with Nazism abroad. Soon France debuted the dazzling Normandy, and Britain unveiled the powerful and beloved Queen Mary. Suddenly there was a wealth of modern options for travelers who were turned off by the hyper-nationalism of Hitler's regime. But before declining passenger numbers could truly impact Bremen and Europa, war erupted in Europe. Germany's superliners quickly became a prime target as the world burned around them. At the outbreak of World War II, Bremen found herself trapped in New York. While the US was officially neutral at the time, it was no secret that their allegiance lay with their World War I allies, Great Britain and France. German ships caught in American harbors during the previous war almost universally ended up in the hands of the Americans. Bremen's crew was determined to save their ship from a similar fate. After a tense few days, Bremen was finally able to embark on a secretive dash across the Atlantic. She ended up hiding out in Murmansk before finally returning to Bremerhaven on December 13th, where she was reunited with her sister. Europa had just departed for a westbound voyage when war broke out. She immediately returned to Germany, where she was used as a naval accommodation ship. In early 1940, both Bremen and Europa were sent to Blohm & Voss, where they were converted into troop ships. At the time, Hitler and his advisors were planning an ambitious invasion of the British Isles, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. Nazi leaders were well aware that their plans faced considerable challenges. The Royal Navy significantly outnumbered the Kriegsmarine, which entered the war with a significantly smaller surface fleet that had already been reduced to almost nothing by the summer of 1940. Their best hope of success lay in establishing air superiority and in drawing Britain's home fleet away from the planned landing sites. An elaborate deception plan was devised by General Admiral Rolf Karls, in which numerous German ships would be sent into the North Sea to trick the Royal Navy into believing that the invasion force would land somewhere in Scotland. While the plan initially only called for a handful of smaller cargo vessels, the ruse quickly grew into 4 separate convoys, led by light cruisers, torpedo boats, and minesweepers. To sell the deception, 4 huge ocean liners would join the convoy, including Gneisenau, Potsdam, as well as Germany's greatest liners, Europa and Bremen. But as the Battle of Britain raged on, Hitler's Luftwaffe failed to gain an advantage over the Royal Air Force. Through months of bombing and brutal air fights, Britain's resolve only seemed to strengthen. Without sufficient air superiority, Operation Sea Lion couldn't continue. Hitler officially postponed the plan on September 17, 1940, and focus shifted to other arenas. This left Bremen and Europa with no significant wartime role, and both liners sat rusting in Bremerhaven. On March 16, 1941, Bremen was engulfed in a raging inferno. The blaze lasted 2 days and completely gutted the liner. Nazi officials were outraged at the loss, and after a lengthy investigation, it was found that the blaze was started by a 14-year-old crew member named Walter Schmidt. The boy set the fire after he was beaten by an officer for not completing an assignment. He was executed by guillotine the following year, one of the youngest people to be judicially executed by Hitler's regime. As naval losses mounted, the Kriegsmarine began searching for ways to acquire aircraft carriers. A proposal was made to convert the Europa into the largest and fastest aircraft carrier in the Nazi fleet. Detailed plans were drawn up that would allow her to carry 24 Messerschmitt Bf-109s and 18 Junkers Ju-87C Stuka dive bombers, but the radical design presented significant challenges in recentering the vessel's center of gravity, and by the end of 1942, the plan was abandoned. Incredibly, Europa survived the war unscathed, aside from the wear of years of neglected maintenance. When the US Army entered Bremerhaven in 1945, the liner was surrendered and handed over to the US Navy on May 8th. She was officially commissioned as a US troop ship on August 25, 1945. After some quick maintenance, she began a series of voyages repatriating US troops on September 11, 1945. She was decommissioned on May 2, 1946, and handed over to the French on June 8th as a war prize to replace the lost SS Normandy. While she was intact, the liner required significant work to bring her back to her pre-war elegance, and she was sent to Le Havre for a major refit. While work was underway, the French port city was hit by a major storm on December 8, 1946. High winds broke Europa free from her moorings, sending her drifting aimlessly into the harbor, where she smashed into the burned-out wreck of the SS Paris, which had caught fire and sank only a few months before the war. The damage was significant. Europa almost immediately sank, coming to rest in the mud on an even keel. For a moment, it seemed that the great German liner may finally have met her end. But when the storm lifted and the ship was inspected, it seemed that she might be able to be saved after all. The Europa proved once again that she was a survivor, not ready to give up anytime soon. Salvaging the former Europa, now called the SS Liberté by her new French owners, was no easy task. It took divers 4 months to reseal her hull before the liner could be refloated. She was finally raised on April 15, 1947, and towed to the famous Chantier de l'Atlantique shipyards in Saint-Nazaire, where she would be almost entirely rebuilt. Remarkably, her engines were salvageable, but her interiors were completely overhauled. The work took almost 3 years to complete. And because the former Europa loved drama, she caught fire once again in October 1949. The blaze ripped through her newly rebuilt passenger spaces, causing significant damage. But it was brought under control and these spaces were again rebuilt. It took over $19 million to transform the remnants of Europa into the glamorous French liner Liberté. Her interiors were completely redesigned to reflect the opulence passengers expected from a French liner. Many fittings and art pieces that once adorned the Normandy made their way into her first-class spaces. Gone was her restrained pre-war elegance, but for the most part these changes were met with celebration. Her yellow funnels were painted the French line's red and black, and fins were added to address the persistent issue of smoke drifting down to her passenger decks. The Liberté sailed her maiden voyage in August 1950. She arrived in New York to rave reviews and the excitement usually reserved for a brand new superliner. She arrived just in time to enjoy the final heyday of transatlantic ocean travel. And for most of the 1950s, she was a beloved way to cross the Atlantic, especially for tourists eager to experience the glamour of Paris. But it wasn't long before French line executives turned their attention to the future. While they were slow to realize the existential threat posed by air travel, they recognized that the pre-war liners increasingly felt outdated as culture and technology raced forward. In 1956, they ordered a modern superliner that they knew would eventually replace the Ile-de-France and the Liberté. SS France was launched on May 11, 1960 and sailed her maiden voyage on February 3, 1962. By then, passenger numbers were plummeting. Ile-de-France was retired from service in 1959. With SS France wowing the few travelers still committed to crossing by sea, Liberté's days were numbered. She was laid up in the fall of 1962. And while proposals were made to turn her into a hotel for the 1962 Seattle World's Fair, hope soon faded as these deals fell through. The former Europa's luck finally ran out. On December 29, 1962, she was sold for scrap. Almost immediately, she sailed for India, where she would be broken up the following year, putting an end to an incredible legacy. There's a unique poignancy to the story of Bremen and Europa. They were beautiful triumphs of art and engineering, built before Germany's potential was co-opted by evil. The fire Germany unleashed on the world consumed Bremen. But somehow Europa, just like the continent that she was named for, emerged from the war, battered but still alive, ready to rebuild and persevere into the future. While her usefulness soon ran out, she served her passengers and crew with grace, elegance, and safety, before she was cast aside and dashed to the dustbin of history. Thank you so much for watching. I want to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members who got to see this video early and ad-free. There are a ton of new perks on my Patreon, so check it out if you want to support the channel. Thank you again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until next one, be nice to people.